Hey guys, tonight we're doing something both cozy and slightly masochistic. We're spending an entire winter night inside a medieval monastery just to see how monks somehow survived, prayed, and didn't completely lose their toes to frostbite in the name of holiness. You probably won't survive this, but let's pretend. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes inside stone walls that smell of smoke and candle grease. The air is dense, ancient, and colder than you expected. It's the kind of chill that doesn't care how many layers you wear. It just settles into your bones like rent you forgot to pay. It's midnight, or maybe earlier. Monks didn't exactly trust clocks yet, and their schedule revolved around bells that marked the sacred hours. Somewhere above, a tower bell waits to wake the entire abbey for matins, the first service of the night. You can already feel the dread of that sound. It's the medieval equivalent of your 4 a.m. alarm, except instead of coffee and emails, you get chanting and fasting. A faint light trembles from a single candle near your straw mattress. It's not exactly luxury. Your blanket is coarse wool that could double as a loofah, and your pillow is filled with something that might once have been hay but now feels like regret. You sit up, rubbing your eyes, and realize that silence here is not optional. The vow isn't just about keeping quiet, it's about listening. Every breath echoes. Somewhere, someone's sandals scrape against stone, then stop. That's Brother Martin. He's always first up, the overachiever of holiness. He claims he wakes naturally at the first hint of the bell's vibration through the stones, though you suspect he just never sleeps. The bell tolls a sound so deep it feels like the night itself bending. You step into the corridor carrying a small wooden lamp with an unsteady flame. The air outside bites instantly. It smells of cold limestone, wet wool, and smoke from the dying hearth in the refectory. The hallway leads toward the chapel, its archways black as cave mouths. The floor beneath your bare feet is colder than any punishment, but you walk anyway because here, hesitation feels like heresy. Inside the chapel, faint blue light leaks through narrow stained glass, throwing fractured halos across the flagstones. Monks in identical brown habits move like shadows, each one bowing at the same rhythm, as if tethered by some invisible pulse. You slip into line, trying to match their pace, your mind still stuck on the absurdity of waking up to pray when normal people are safely dreaming about bread and cheese. But this is where the medieval mind differed. Night wasn't a time for rest, but for battle. Not against people, but against sloth, temptation, and frostbite. The first psalm begins, low and trembling. Latin words roll like distant thunder, and you realize something. This sound, this rhythm, was the medieval version of background noise, the kind that lulled you into transcendence or at least distracted you from how cold your fingers are. The chant rises and falls, and you catch one historical detail whispered by the centuries. The Benedictine rule required 8 prayer services per day, including 2 in the dead of night. Imagine your boss scheduling Zoom meetings at 2 a.m. and calling it character building. The flicker of candles distorts the painted saints on the walls, making them seem alive, almost impatient. One scholar later argued that these nocturnal rituals kept minds sharp and souls humble, but others debate whether it was really about holiness or just medieval insomnia dressed up in theology. Somewhere in that darkness a candle sputters, and for a moment you swear the flame sighs. That's your first lesson tonight. When the world is silent enough, even fire sounds like prayer. And as the chant deepens, your mind drifts, not away but inward into a stillness that feels both sacred and slightly mad. You're no longer sure whether you're freezing or glowing, only that the night outside will not end soon, and neither will this ritual. The first note of the bell doesn't sound like metal at all. It sounds like time being torn open, a vibration so low you feel it in your ribs before you hear it in your ears. You flinch, because in this monastery the bell is not an invitation, it's an order. You and a dozen other half-awake souls shuffle out of your cells, shadows with hoods gliding over stone polished smooth by centuries of bare feet. The corridor breathes frost. You think of your modern heating app and immediately feel judged by every saint carved into the walls. The air smells of tallow and humility, which are basically the same thing here. No one speaks. Talking before matins is like sneezing during meditation. It just isn't done. A single candle leads the way down the cloister, and you realize how little light a candle actually gives when you need it most. You could fit its whole circle of glow into your palm, and beyond that, the night is absolute. The bell keeps tolling, echoing from tower to tower, and for a moment you imagine the sound traveling across the frozen countryside, stirring shepherds, owls, and maybe one annoyed fox. In medieval records, this bell was called the night watcher, a reminder that prayer never slept, even if everyone else wanted to. Historians tell us Benedictine monks divided their nights into sacred intervals, matins around midnight, then lauds at dawn. They believed that God listened best when humans were least comfortable. It's a theology that could double as an endurance sport. The cloister door opens with a groan that feels like the building itself sighing awake. Inside the chapel, the darkness has texture. You can feel it cling to your robe. The first monk begins the chant, voice low, wavering, and for a moment you hear not a man but the continuation of centuries. The Latin rises. Domini labia mea apris. Lord, open my lips. A bold request considering you can barely open your eyes. But there's a rhythm in it, like breathing in cold air and exhaling light. The choir joins and something happens to the acoustic sound doesn't bounce, it hovers, settling like dust over everyone's heads. The abbey walls, 12 feet thick, keep the sound trapped until it becomes a second kind of warmth. You start to sway with it, like the chant is rocking you back to sleep, which is of course the opposite of what it's meant to do. Monks were warned against drowsiness during prayer. One 12th century abbot supposedly kept a bucket of snow near his pew for emergency awakenings. You wonder how HR would handle that today. The chants continue, each verse folding into the next until time dissolves. This was deliberate. Ancient records say the liturgy was designed to blur boundaries, so monks could forget whether they'd been awake for hours or minutes. Some scholars argue this rhythmic disorientation helped induce a state of oratio continua, continuous prayer that bordered on trance. Others, less romantic, suggest it was just the auditory illusion of a really long meeting. You glance toward the high altar where a stained glass Christ glows faintly from moonlight seeping in behind him. His eyes look stern but sleepy, like even the divine might appreciate a later alarm. The candles flicker, and for an instant their shadows seem to bow along with the monks. That's the strange magic of this hour. It's so quiet you start seeing reverence in the smallest movements. The bell tolls once more, signaling the shift to the next psalm. You catch yourself whispering along now, the Latin half remembered, half invented. Outside, the wind claws at the chapel windows. You can't see it, but you know the courtyard stones are sheathed in ice, and the water barrels have frozen solid. And still, the monks chant. They always chant, because for them, the world outside is irrelevant. The real battle is against sleep, distraction, and cold fingers that refuse to turn the page. You look down at your trembling hands and think, maybe faith isn't about believing what's warm. Maybe it's about choosing to keep singing when you can see your breath. The psalm ends. A small bell chimes again, softer this time, and everyone bows. The service disperses in silence. You follow the flicker of lamps back through the corridor, each step echoing like a heartbeat, and realize the night isn't over, it's only begun. You step into the cloister, and the cold hits you like a vow you forgot you made. The air here is not simply cold, it's committed to being cold. The kind of cold that has its own personality. Disciplined, judgmental, unimpressed by your fragile mortal body. You pull your rough wool cloak tighter, but it's like hugging a cactus made of sandpaper. The cloister, a square walkway enclosing a small garden, is the monastery's heartbeat, if a heart could freeze between beats. Every stone underfoot gleams faintly with frost, smooth from centuries of sandals dragging through the same rhythm of devotion. Your breath fogs in pale clouds, small prayers that vanish before they're heard. Above, arches frame the winter sky, a black expanse spiked with stars that look close enough to reach but cold enough to burn. The monks move silently in a long, slow procession, the hem of each habit whispering over stone. You join in, not because you're commanded, but because doing otherwise would make too much noise. The rule of silence reigns here, though the irony is that silence in a monastery is never actually silent. It's a chorus of tiny sounds, dripping water from a cracked gutter, the scratch of fabric, the faint rasp of sandals. It's the kind of quiet where every cough sounds like a confession. You walk the perimeter once, twice, again, losing track. Time doesn't work properly in the cloister. Maybe that's the point. Benedict's rule said a monk's day should be divided between prayer, work, and study. But during winter, when work froze with the fields, pacing the cloister became its own occupation. Its meditation, exercise, and existential therapy rolled into one. Somewhere in the 13th century, a French abbot supposedly called it the treadmill of the soul. You grin at the thought that monks invented cardio centuries before gyms started charging for it. Your bare feet because yes, shoes are for the weak or the wealthy. Press against icy flagstones, and you imagine each step as an act of defiance, a tiny rebellion against comfort, a declaration that pain can be sacred if endured politely. In the center courtyard, snow lies untouched, except for the prints of crows. You notice a well there, its rope stiff with frost. You wonder how often someone has looked into it and seen only darkness reflected back. The cloister was built for exactly this kind of thinking, a controlled loop that keeps you close to holiness while giving your mind space to wander, carefully, of course, within acceptable theological parameters. A modern psychologist might call it structured mindfulness, but here it's just obedience with good acoustics. You run a hand along the cold stone wall and realize that every block was carved, carried, and set by someone who probably hummed the same psalms you just heard. That's the strange comfort of monastic life. It's both personal and eternal. Your individual misery gets absorbed into a centuries-long rhythm until it almost feels meaningful. You pause by a narrow window where a breeze slips through, sharp as glass. Outside, the forest glimmers under a crust of snow. Somewhere in that darkness, wolves are hunting. You shiver, partly from cold, partly from gratitude that your nightly danger is limited to splinters and theology. One monk ahead of you, Brother Hugo, if you remember right, carries a lantern that barely lights the hem of his robe. His pace is so steady it borders on hypnotic. You start counting his steps, lose count, then start over. Time slows to syrup. And then in that suspended silence you hear something. The faint rhythm of the sea inside your own ears. The pulse of your body reminding you you're still alive. It's a humbler kind of prayer than Latin ever managed. A historical fact slips into your memory. Cloisters were designed not just for prayer but for circulation, both physical and mental. In an age before central heating, monks walked to stay warm enough to think. A quirky tidbit from a 14th century record says one abbey issued walking permissions to brothers who showed signs of frostbite, as if a little exercise might appease divine frost. Scholars still debate whether this rule was symbolic discipline or just proto-healthcare wrapped in theology. Either way, you can't help thinking the medieval world was basically one long wellness retreat. If your idea of wellness includes hypothermia and self-reproach, you reach the far corner of the cloister and pause beneath a carving of Saint Benedict himself. His face, weathered by centuries of candle smoke and cold, seems to smirk at you. Maybe he knows something you don't. Maybe he's laughing at the absurd continuity of it all. One more mortal walking in circles trying to meet eternity halfway. You take another breath, the air cutting sharp through your chest, and keep walking. The snow outside glows faintly blue. The stars fade behind thin clouds, and somewhere far off, the bell that divided the dark is waiting to strike again. Dot. You wake again to the second bell, and if the first one cracked the night, this one pulverizes it. It's colder now, somehow colder than before, as if the darkness has grown fangs. You can feel the chill through your robe like an argument you've already lost. The day's rhythm begins, though calling it day feels optimistic. Dawn is still hours away, and the monastery treats sunlight as an optional luxury. You shuffle toward the refectory, that stone chamber where the walls sweat moisture and the benches are as unforgiving as the rule of St. Benedict itself. There's no coffee, no small talk, and certainly no good morning. The monk ahead of you nods once, the medieval equivalent of "we're suffering together." The first thing you learn here, holiness is just routine with branding. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline, each hour carved into your day like notches in eternity. And while the idea sounds poetic, it's basically God's version of a factory shift. You pray, you read, you work, you eat. Barely, you sleep, also barely, and you repeat. Yet within that repetition there's a strange comfort, predictability in a world that's mostly chaos. Still, no amount of divine order helps when your ink freezes mid-sentence, or your breath clouds the page like smoke. Medieval chroniclers mention monks heating their ink pots with candle flames just to keep writing through winter. That same chronicler, incidentally, also described a brother who accidentally set his manuscript on fire and claimed it was divine editing. As you settle onto the bench for breakfast, porridge so thin it's basically oat-scented water, you can see your reflection trembling in the bowl. Silence reigns, of course, except for the appointed reader standing at the lectern, reciting scripture in a tone so monotone it makes Gregorian chant sound like jazz. You wonder if he ever loses his place just to see if anyone's awake. They don't react. Discipline here is a kind of art form. When the bell rings again, everyone rises in sync, like a flock of penguins migrating between miseries. You follow, and once again the stone hall swallows your footsteps. Out in the yard, snowflakes drift lazily, catching the weak light from the high windows. The world feels carved out of ice and silence. A monk shovels snow from the walkway with a wooden spade, muttering psalms between shivers. You join him because doing nothing feels colder than moving. The rhythm becomes hypnotic. Scrape, breathe, whisper, repeat. Your nose runs, but dignity froze hours ago. Somewhere between verse and frostbite, you remember a curious historical fact. Monasteries weren't just religious centers, they were early hubs of engineering. Heating systems, hypocausts in some wealthy abbeys, channeled warm air from stoves under the floors, though most monks still froze for spiritual consistency. Some scholars even argue that the cold itself was seen as a test, a reminder that flesh was weak, which sounds noble until you can't feel your toes. And yet there's humor in it, too. Though no one dares laugh out loud. You think of Brother Anselm, who once wrapped his hands in parchment scraps from the scriptorium, claiming they were holy gloves, or the anonymous genius who suggested replacing fasting with selective hibernation. Those details don't make it into official histories, but you can feel their ghostly grins in the cracks of the walls. Every community has its loopholes. The bell rings again, its sound thin in the frozen air. You trudge toward the chapel for prime, where the sun is still nowhere to be found. You pass an open door leading to the storeroom. Barrels of salted fish, sacks of grain, and one unfortunate barrel labeled pickled turnips. It smells like punishment. You wonder how faith can survive without flavor, yet somehow it does. Perhaps because repetition itself becomes sacred, the act of continuing when nothing changes. As the chant begins, you let the Latin roll over you. Your mind drifts between the words until they lose meaning, dissolving into pure sound. That's when you feel it. That flicker of something beyond cold or exhaustion. Not warmth exactly, but alignment, like gears clicking in place. Maybe that's what faith really is. Not feeling holy, but showing up anyway, shivering and half asleep, whispering prayers to a God who might be just as tired of the weather as you are. The service ends. The monks file out, faces blank but serene, as if frostbite is just another virtue. You follow them into the corridor where pale light finally spills from the eastern window. The day has begun, if it can be called a day at all. The cold still rules, but now it feels less like an enemy and more like a roommate you've learned to tolerate. Somewhere in the distance, another bell waits for its turn, patient as eternity. The lantern in your hand is older than most dynasties, its brass handle polished by centuries of trembling fingers. It's small, unimpressive, and yet here it is, the only thing standing between you and a darkness that seems intent on swallowing the monastery whole. You lift it, and the thin flame wavers like it's deciding whether it wants to help you or not. The air is thick with the smell of tallow, smoky, animal, stubborn, and it clings to your robe, your skin, even your thoughts. It's hard to imagine, but this single flicker of light was once considered a miracle. Before sunrise, before firewood rations, before candles became affordable for anyone who wasn't royal or saintly, the monastery's lamp was a relic of civilization itself. You take a slow step through the corridor, where every shadow feels alive, every corner a confession waiting to happen. The floor moans underfoot, an ancient complaint you now recognize as comfort. Somewhere in the darkness, a rat scurries. You don't blame it. It probably just wants warmth and redemption like everyone else. You reach the small storage room where lanterns are kept between vigils. They line the shelves like disciplined soldiers, each one dented, wax-stained, and whispering stories through soot. A few are cracked from years of use, their glass patched with thin sheets of horn, translucent enough to glow but cloudy enough to remind you that perfection was never part of the plan. You light a few more lamps for the night, and the room slowly fills with gold and smoke, softening the edges of every object. There's something almost holy about the patience of this light. It doesn't rush, doesn't boast, it just burns because it must, until it can't, and somehow that feels familiar. Historical records mention that monasteries kept a perpetual flame in certain chapels, tended by one monk through the night. Its steady glow symbolized the unbroken watch of prayer. Though, let's be honest, it probably also prevented everyone from tripping over pews at 2 a.m. That flame had to be protected from drafts, bats, and overzealous penitents trying to prove humility by extinguishing it for the glory of God. A quirky entry from a 15th century chronicle tells of a monk who accidentally swallowed lamp oil thinking it was holy water and then claimed he felt illuminated. Scholars, of course, debate whether this story is literal, metaphorical, or just medieval slapstick. You carry one of the lanterns down the hall, its glow flickering on the walls like a memory replaying itself. The arches above curve into shadow, their ribs glowing gold for a heartbeat before disappearing again. You think about patience, how it's less a virtue here and more a survival skill. Every flick of the wick, every careful step, every endless chant at midnight, each is a small defiance against time. In your world, patience is waiting for Wi-Fi. Here, it's waiting for dawn without freezing solid. Outside, in the courtyard, the air feels sharper, almost crystalline. The snow glows faintly under the moon, and you can see your breath drift into the light like smoke offering itself to heaven. A row of lanterns hangs from the cloister arch, swaying gently. Their light dances across the stone statues lining the walk, saints, scholars, maybe a few sinners who made good later. Their faces are softened by age and flame, expressionless yet comforting. You realize that even stone seems patient here. It erodes so slowly it practically prays. You walk past Brother Hugo again, the one who carries the tallest lamp. His flame never flickers, no matter how the wind sneaks through the cracks. You ask him once how he manages it, forgetting that silence is law. He simply turns, gestures at his chest, then points to the flame. You interpret that as faith, though for all you know it could mean good posture. Still, the message lands. Some things only stay alight because someone keeps holding them up. The chapel looms ahead, its doors cracked open just enough to spill a warm sliver of light into the dark. Inside, dozens of candles burn in front of a carved crucifix. Their flames form a trembling ocean, and as you stand there, it's impossible not to be mesmerized. The light doesn't illuminate so much as reveal the dust motes, the tears in the wood, the uneven breath of the brother kneeling beside you. Every imperfection glows briefly before fading back into mystery. Maybe that's what the monks understand better than most. Light isn't meant to conquer darkness, it's meant to coexist with it, gently, persistently, without complaint. You sit on the stone floor, setting your lantern beside you. The flame wobbles once, then steadies, proud to have made it this far. You stare at it, trying to measure its patience against your own. The wind howls outside, shaking the old doors, but inside, the light holds steady. You close your eyes for a moment, and it burns there still, behind your eyelids, like a promise you didn't know you needed. The bell hasn't rung yet, the night hasn't ended, and winter isn't done testing you, but the lantern stays, humming its quiet hymn of endurance. You breathe in the smell of smoke and wax, and you understand this isn't just illumination, it's faith with a wick dot. Your fingers have become unreliable friends, slow, stiff, mutinous. You try to bend them around the spine of a psalter, but they resist, crackling like frozen twigs. The air in the chapel is thick with breath and candle smoke, and though a dozen bodies crowd the pews, it's still cold enough to see halos of vapor forming around each monk's whisper. You shift the book closer to the flame, but the light quivers, mocking your effort. The psalms blur into a river of ink, the Latin shimmering in and out of focus. You flex your fingers again, and it feels like prayer by itself. Matins has stretched into lauds now, which means you've been awake for what feels like a week. The chants come slower, each syllable dragging like a weary pilgrim's footstep. You watch Brother Hugo's lips move, steady as snowfall, while your own thoughts wander to dangerous modern comparisons. Monks as endurance athletes, faith as a marathon no one signed up for voluntarily. Yet beneath the sarcasm, something true stirs. These men aren't performing. They're enduring. They're turning suffering into rhythm, cold into concentration. It's not martyrdom, it's training. You imagine them as spiritual blacksmiths, hammering their own hearts on an invisible anvil until they glow faintly from the inside. You rub your palms together and feel the grain of the wool sleeves scratch like pennants. It's absurd and beautiful all at once. Somewhere in the back of your mind a memory surfaces. The rule of Saint Benedict said that idleness is the enemy of the soul. And indeed, nothing about this night could be called idle. Each breath, each verse, each shiver is an act of will. You reach for a pen, an iron stylus, and it bites your skin with its chill. The ink, half frozen, clings to the nib like tar. You start to copy a line of scripture. In nocte consurgam, confiteri tibi, in the night I rise to give you thanks. Your handwriting wobbles, an unholy hybrid of Latin and frostbite. Somewhere behind you, a monk coughs, a deep, chesty sound that echoes through the chapel like thunder in miniature. It reminds you that faith, like lungs, requires maintenance. There's a historical note you recall. In the 11th century, the monks of Cluny built heated floors beneath their choir stalls, not out of luxury but mercy. The abbot wrote that cold makes prayer brittle. It's a lovely phrase, though another historian insists he only did it because half the choir caught pneumonia. The debate continues, as most monastic debates do, between compassion and practicality. Either way, you take a little brittle prayer right now if it came with warm toes. You lift your gaze toward the altar. The crucifix gleams faintly, the gold leaf catching the flicker of light like dawn rehearsing behind the clouds. You imagine Christ watching you, not sternly but with sympathy, as if to say, yes, I know about long nights too. You smile at the thought, and for a moment the cold fades, Not because the air changes, but because the act of noticing something divine makes your blood remember how to move. Maybe that's what they mean by fiery faith. It isn't heat from outside, it's defiance from within. The bell tolls again, and the sound vibrates through your fingertips. You swear you can feel it thawing you slightly. Around you, the monks kneel, and you join them, resting your stiff hands on the cold stone. You close your eyes and let the chant flow over you. The rhythm returns. Inhale, sing, exhale, shiver, over and over, until it's impossible to tell where the body ends and devotion begins. You think of those medieval manuscripts painted by men whose fingers looked just like yours, now blue, numb, but still tracing the gold that would outlive them all. A stray thought breaks through. Maybe this is why faith and art are cousins. Both require holding a flame so small you have to shield it with your own pain. You open your eyes and the candle before you has melted halfway down, its wick bending but unbroken. Wax pools around its base like a miniature sea. You dip your finger into it. It's warm for a second, then hardens instantly. You laugh quietly, a breath of steam in the cold. You're half monk, half experiment in human endurance, and entirely awake now. The psalm ends. The abbot's voice breaks the silence. Deo gratias. You murmur the response with frozen lips, and for the first time tonight you actually mean it. By the time the final amen drifts into the beams, your stomach has joined the chorus, loud, desperate, and slightly ungodly. Dawn hasn't shown up yet, but the bell for the refectory rings anyway. A mercy disguised as obligation. The corridor smells faintly of smoke and something like porridge if you squint with your nose. The monks file in 2 by 2, hoods lowered, hands folded. It's less a breakfast line than a slow-moving sermon. You sit on a bench worn smooth by generations of elbows, and wonder if holiness automatically comes with lower blood sugar. The tables are bare except for bowls, wooden spoons, and the faint hope of calories. Steam rises from a single pot at the center, the color of beige theology. The monk ladling it out does so with surgical precision, each scoop equal, each bowl filled to exactly 1 humble inch. You take yours with gratitude so sincere it almost tastes like flavor. It's thin barley gruel with an occasional oat for texture, and you chew it the way one contemplates life choices. Somewhere, a reader at the pulpit begins reciting a passage from St. Benedict's Rule. The voice steady, the rhythm slower than digestion. You're not supposed to look up while eating, but curiosity wins. The reader's breath fogs in front of him like incense from a very tired angel. You learn quickly that meals here are measured not by fullness but by restraint. The monks fast often, partly for discipline, partly because winter supply chains were medieval at best. A historical record from Canterbury mentions that during harsh winters, rations were halved and prayers doubled, which feels suspiciously like divine budgeting. Another entry claims one abbot allowed cheese only on feast days lest joy become habitual. Theologians still argue whether that was ascetic wisdom or lactose intolerance. Either way, the result is the same. Hunger sharpens prayer the way frost sharpens air. You sip the last of your gruel, which has cooled into something texturally philosophical, and set the bowl down just as the bell rings again. No one lingers. The silence isn't awkward, it's disciplined, a choreography of minimalism. As you stand, the smell of the kitchen lingers. A mixture of wood smoke, damp straw, and the faint sweetness of yeast from tomorrow's bread. Brother Matthias, the cook, moves like a ghost among pots, his face glowing with the steam of righteousness and cabbage. You glimpse a small loaf cooling on the windowsill, and briefly consider the moral consequences of theft. Then you remember the vow of obedience, and more importantly, the abbot's legendary hearing. You step away from temptation like a professional. Out in the cloister, the air feels sharper for the brief warmth you've just left behind. The sky is beginning to pale, hinting at a sun that seems permanently late for work. Walking back toward the chapel, you realize that in this world food is never just food. It's metaphor, measurement, and meditation. The portions are small because excess dulls the senses, hunger keeps the spirit awake. Modern self-help would call it mindfulness, though monks perfected it centuries before anyone could trademark the term. You chuckle quietly, which earns you a curious glance from Brother Hugo. You mime indigestion, He nods approvingly, thinking you've been struck by humility. Everyone wins. A cold draft snakes through the hallway, and you pull your robe tight, feeling the meager meal settle like a candle in your belly, weak but persistent. That's the strange arithmetic of monastic survival. You subtract comfort to add clarity, and somehow it works. By the time you reach the cloister's far door, the hunger has softened into focus, the body forgotten for a while. You glance back at the refectory window, see the flicker of firelight behind it, and whisper a half-joke to yourself. Blessed are the moderately fed, for they shall stay awake for vespers. The echo of your breath fades into the corridor, and the next bell begins to ring. After hours of prayer and chores, when even the bells seem tired of their own ringing, the monastery exhales into a rare and delicate thing, semi-silence. Not the strict vow kind, but the after-hours version, where whispers sneak between hooded heads like mischievous spirits that forgot the rules. You sit with the others in the long corridor that runs beside the cloister, lanterns guttering in small glass cages. The stones here are warmer from the day's faint sunlight, and you can almost pretend the air doesn't bite. That's when the murmur begins, a thin thread of sound traveling from monk to monk, half gossip, half confession. It's not conversation exactly, it's the verbal equivalent of steam escaping from a kettle that's been on too long. Brother Hugo leans toward Brother Anselm and mutters something about the new novice falling asleep during lauds, a sin apparently punishable by an extra hour of psalms and mild eternal regret. Anselm responds without moving his lips, a ventriloquist of virtue. You catch fragments, dreamed of bread, snored in Latin, the abbot smiled. It's comedy at 1 decibel. You realize that these murmured exchanges are as essential as prayer. They keep sanity from evaporating entirely. Even saints, it turns out, need punchlines. A chronicler once recorded that in certain Benedictine houses, monks were allowed 1 recreational conversation per week, supervised by an elder to ensure it didn't escalate into heresy or laughter. Scholars still argue whether that rule was enforced or merely aspirational, because really, who could police joy once it started? The whispers drift toward safer subjects. The weather, still unholy, the dwindling candle supply, the rumor that the bishop's mule slipped on the ice last market day and now limps like a moral lesson. You smile under your hood, trying not to inhale the smell of wax and wool too deeply. It's the perfume of patience itself. One monk tells a story about a hermit who survived 40 winters by eating nothing but pine bark and divine inspiration. Another counters that the hermit probably moved south and rebranded as a saint. The line earns a silent chuckle, rippled down the corridor. Humor here is currency. No coins ever change hands, but laughter spends just the same. You shift your weight, careful not to let the bench creak, and notice how every whisper feels both forbidden and necessary. The monastery's great paradox. Speech is limited so that meaning can expand. Without chatter, every word gains gravity. When Brother Matthias quietly asks if anyone else saw the strange light over the woods last night, no one mocks him. Maybe it was an angel. Maybe moonlight on snow. Maybe insomnia wearing a halo. Each theory equally holy. One monk crosses himself, another shrugs. Debate ends there, as it often does with a shrug sanctified by fatigue. Your thoughts wander to history again. Medieval theologians loved cataloging sins of speech, idle talk, detraction, murmuring. Yet the same records note that even abbots sometimes conversed softly after compline, for the sake of warmth. Warmth not physical, but human. The idea that compassion sometimes breaks its own rules. It's comforting, this little loophole carved in stone centuries ago. Talk quietly, sin gently, forgive often. The lantern nearest you pops, its wick collapsing into molten wax. The flame sputters, then steadies, throwing long shadows that dance across the cloister wall like hooded silhouettes confessing to the night. The whispers fade one by one, until the only sound left is the wind pressing its cold mouth against the window panes. You pull your hood closer, hiding a small grin you don't quite understand. Maybe holiness isn't silence at all. Maybe it's the ability to listen for warmth inside it. Somewhere deep in the monastery, a bell stirs again, softer this time, as if reminding everyone that even rest must be measured. You rise with the others, No words left, only the echo of laughter still trapped beneath your hood. The scriptorium waits for you like a test of endurance disguised as scholarship. It's the monastery's beating brain, a long, narrow hall lined with desks, each equipped with a candle, a quill, and a monk somewhere between inspiration and hypothermia. You take your place among them, pulling your robe tighter. The windows are black mirrors now, the snow outside glowing faintly blue beneath the moon. The only sound is scratching. Dozens of pens dragging across parchment like a forest of crickets who've converted to Latin. The smell is intoxicating. Wax, ink, dust, and faint mildew, the perfume of devotion. Each monk works hunched over his manuscript, copying sacred text one letter at a time. If you ever wondered how patience could be made visible, this is it. A row of shivering silhouettes, haloed by candlelight, bent in worship to grammar. Your hands tremble, not from piety but from temperature. The ink in your pot has developed a thin crust, and you have to warm it with your breath before dipping your quill again. The parchment crackles as you touch it. It was once calfskin, now more like frostbitten leather. You whisper the words as you write. In principio erat verbum, because the rule says your lips must move with your pen. The theory is that writing and speaking together engrave truth deeper into the soul. The practice, however, mostly engraves numbness into your jaw. A sneeze, 2 desks over, breaks the rhythm, earning a dozen silent glares. No one dares laugh, but a few shoulders shake in quiet rebellion. You glance up and see Brother Hugo at the far end, illuminating a manuscript with tiny brushstrokes of gold. The candlelight catches the leaf, and for a moment the page looks alive, breathing. That shimmer liquid sunlight, trapped in pigment, might be the closest thing to magic left in the world. You remember a fact you once read. Medieval gold leaf was so thin that a single ounce could cover an entire Bible. Yet here it's being applied with trembling fingers, each motion an act of faith that beauty itself can survive the dark. Some scholars later argued these illuminations weren't decoration at all, but theology in color, light rendered visible. Others, predictably, dismissed them as distractions from pure devotion. The debate continues in dusty libraries where the heating actually works. You pause to stretch your back and nearly knock over the candle. A tiny disaster, quickly averted. The flame wobbles but holds, and you swear it gives you a look, equal parts reproach and solidarity. You whisper an apology to it, just in case. Around you, the air hums with quiet concentration, a communal trance. It's easy to forget where you are until a door creaks open and a gust of snow drifts in. The cold rolls through the room like a ghost checking attendance. Quills falter, coughs bloom, a few candles gutter out. The abbot enters briefly, checking progress. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His eyes sweep the room like punctuation, turning every head back to its proper angle. Hours stretch thin. You lose the line you were on and find yourself copying a verse you already wrote 3 pages ago. The repetition feels both maddening and oddly musical. Maybe this is what prayer becomes after too long in the cold, a loop so perfect it stops needing reason. You look down at your ink-stained hands and think of all the anonymous scribes who did this their whole lives, each convinced their cramped handwriting would keep the word alive for centuries. And somehow it did. You can almost hear their collective sigh echoing through time, grateful that someone else has joined the choir of cramped wrists. A candle pops, scattering wax onto your sleeve. It cools instantly into small translucent scales, like frozen tears. You brush them away and close the book gently. The page gleams with wet ink and faint gold. It's imperfect, but it glows. That's enough. The bell for midnight prayer sounds, distant but clear, and every monk rises in unison, stretching stiff limbs. You blow out your candle, and for a heartbeat the darkness is complete. Then dozens of other flames reignite in sequence, one after another like stars being born. You follow them out into the corridor, your fingers still black with ink, your heart strangely warm. Somewhere behind you, the gold on the page catches the last flicker of light, shining faintly like a promise whispered across centuries that even in endless winter, someone will keep writing until dawn. The candle before you trembles, its flame stretching thin like a nervous monk who's just realized the psalm count was off by 2. You stare at it longer than you should, long enough that it starts to feel alive. The wax hisses softly, the wick curls, and in that half-dream state brought on by fasting, fatigue, and faith, you're certain it's whispering. It's not words exactly, more like an opinion. The candle disapproves of your handwriting. You smirk under your breath and lean closer, pretending to adjust the flame. The heat kisses your cheek, the scent of melted tallow tickling your nose with something that might once have been lamb. Around you the scriptorium hums with the small symphony of quills and coughs, the same rhythm that has filled these walls for centuries. Every candle here seems to join the chorus, some crackling in protest, others sighing as if exhausted by human ambition. You remember reading that medieval monks believed fire could speak the language of the soul. Flickering was divine approval, sputtering divine critique. One chronicler even claimed a candle once wept on the anniversary of St. Cuthbert's death, its wax streaming like tears down the altar. Historians debate whether it was miracle, condensation, or an overactive imagination fueled by no carbs after sunset. You choose the last option, but still you can't shake the sense that the flame knows something you don't. Its light moves over your hands, tracing every callus, every scar, as if judging the story your fingers tell. The air is colder tonight, and yet your mind feels strangely lucid. Maybe it's the candlelight. Maybe hypothermia just makes philosophers of everyone. You glance across the table at Brother Hugo, his face half lit, half shadow, looking like he's in conversation with his own flame. No one speaks, yet the room is full of dialogues. The hiss of wax, the creak of wood, the soft scratch of pens translating eternity into ink. It's what one scholar centuries later would call the music of the diligent. You find the phrase poetic, though others argue it's just the medieval version of workplace noise. You dip your quill again and realize how the candle becomes your companion, equal parts collaborator and critic. When it burns steady, the lines flow easily. When it gutters, your words falter. You whisper, half joking, "Stay with me." The flame steadies, smug as any sermon. You grin. Faith, you realize, often starts as a conversation with things that don't technically respond. God, candle, wind, it's all the same grammar of longing. A drop of wax lands on your wrist. It burns for an instant before cooling into a tiny white seal, perfect and round. You think of it as punctuation, the period to a sentence only heaven can read. The walls breathe with warmth and shadow, the gold on illuminated letters flickering like captured sunrise. You close your eyes just for a heartbeat, and the whole room pulses behind your eyelids. Red, gold, black, silence. The candle doesn't stop talking. It whispers in a tongue older than scripture, older than sound itself, the language of persistence. You open your eyes again. The wax has nearly run out, and the flame leans low, its final bow inevitable. But even as it dies, it throws one last burst of light, bright enough to paint the crucifix across the far wall. For that single instant, everything glows. The ink, the pages, the tired faces, the frost on the window, and then, with a tiny sigh, the candle goes out. The room exhales into darkness, and you hear the shuffle of feet, as other flames are cupped, lifted, shared, one wick lighting another, and another, until the dark fills again with patient, murmuring fire. You follow the others into the choir stalls, and the air there feels thinner, like it's been filtered through prayer too many times. The benches are narrow, built more for humility than comfort, their wood polished by 1,000 penitential backsides. Above, the vaulted ceiling curves into a cold echo chamber, and every sound multiplies until it feels less like music and more like weather. The candles gutter, throwing wild halos on the carved faces of saints, their stone eyes wide and unblinking as if bracing for what's coming. The abbot raises a hand, the bell chimes, and then the first note is released into the freezing air. Pure, hesitant, utterly human. A breath later, another voice joins it, then another, until the sound fills every inch of the chapel, warm and trembling at once. You're singing too now, though. Singing might be generous. It's more like exhaling in rhythm, a slow surrender that catches on each Latin syllable. The words melt into sound, the sound into vibration, and for a moment you can't tell where your breath ends and someone else's begins. It's hypnotic, this choir of the shivering faithful, all slightly off-key but perfectly in time. The cold has turned your lips numb, your tongue heavy, Yet somehow the notes still climb, twining around the rafters like vines searching for sunlight that isn't there. You think of the physics of it, the way sound is just vibration, air trembling against air, and realize that what you're doing right now is literally making warmth out of motion. That's faith made practical. A mainstream historian once wrote that the monks of Cluny developed multi-part harmony, not for art, but as architectural acoustics, a way to keep each other awake in long services. Another theory, more romantic, claims they were trying to echo the choirs of angels. And then there's the fringe argument, your favorite, that Gregorian chant was patterned after the resonance of stone itself, that the monks tuned their voices to vibrate the walls into sympathy. You can feel it now, the hum beneath your feet, the subtle shiver in the columns as though the entire building has joined in. The saints on the walls seem to lean closer. Even the air between candles ripples faintly, as if light itself were keeping time. Brother Hugo's voice rises above the rest, thin and piercing, the sound of someone who has sung through more winters than he can count. You try to match his tone, and fail spectacularly. Your voice cracks. He glances sideways, the faintest smile under his hood. You both know it doesn't matter. No one here expects perfection. They just expect persistence. You keep going. Every breath you take hurts a little less. Every phrase stretches a little longer. When the harmonies finally swell into their peak, something inside you loosens a knot you didn't know you'd tied. Maybe that's grace, or maybe it's just oxygen deprivation. You look up at the rafters. Icicles hang there, glittering like the notes themselves, catching candlelight and scattering it back down in fractured rainbows. The room feels alive now. Alive in the way a body trembles after too long in the cold, shaking off numbness. You think, with a flicker of humor, that sainthood probably just feels like perpetual goosebumps. Somewhere behind you, a bass note wobbles dangerously. The monk responsible coughs in embarrassment, then doubles down, turning the error into harmony. Improvised holiness. The chant tapers off into silence, the final note hovering in the air so long it becomes another kind of sound, the ringing of stillness. You lower your hood and let the quiet settle. The abbot's voice, soft but firm, delivers the final blessing. Pax vobiscum, peace be with you. And for once, you almost believe him. The choir disperses, boots scraping softly against stone, leaving behind the echo of what you just made together. A vibration that will linger long after the last breath has faded. You linger a moment more, staring at the faint plume of your own breath in the candlelight, and realize that this, more than warmth, more than food, more than comfort, is what keeps the monastery alive, the fragile miracle of many frozen voices finding one single note and holding it just long enough to remind themselves they still exist. When the last echo of the chant dissolves, the monks drift back to their cells like embers returning to ash. The doors close one by one, and the quiet that follows feels heavier than sound ever could. You sit for a while in the empty choir stall, wrapped in the kind of silence that hums in your ears. Outside, snow begins to fall again. Slow, deliberate, as if the sky is rewriting the ground in white script. Through a narrow window you watch flakes twist in the lamplight, catching glimpses of their brief, frantic beauty before they vanish on the stone. Inside, everything is still. You can almost hear the monastery breathing, its ancient lungs expanding and contracting with the rhythm of centuries. You walk back through the cloister, each step whispering against the frozen floor. The cold presses in, but the silence presses harder. It's not empty, it's crowded with memory, with discipline, with the ghosts of every chant still vibrating in the walls. You remember something a chronicler once wrote. A monastery is a furnace built of quiet. The phrase fits. The lack of noise isn't absence, it's refinement, like metal in a forge. The louder your own mind feels, the more the silence shapes it into something sharper. You start to notice things you'd missed before. The flicker of a candle behind a door, the soft drip of melted frost along the roof beams, the rustle of robes somewhere in the dark. The architecture amplifies the effect. Monasteries were designed like lungs, cloister, chapel, dormitory, all chambers where breath and prayer circulate. The builders didn't just chase beauty, they engineered devotion. Even acoustics became theology. Modern historians argue that medieval architects understood sound better than they admitted, shaping ceilings so chants echoed in perfect intervals. Others claim that was accidental, divine coincidence disguised as craftsmanship. Either way, it works. The silence now feels tuned, precise, deliberate. You pause near a window where a thin sheet of ice has formed on the inside. It glitters like glass spun from moonlight. You press your palm against it and feel the faintest vibration, the wind outside, perhaps, or the deep bass of the bell tower resonating through stone. The temperature difference leaves a foggy print of your hand, a fleeting mark of warmth in a world built to erase warmth. It's strangely satisfying, a reminder that you exist, that flesh still resists the discipline of eternity. The courtyard beyond the window is blanketed in snow. Statues of saints stand half-buried, their outlines softened until they look almost human again, slumped like weary travelers waiting for spring. You imagine their stone ears filled with the same silence you hear now, the kind that isn't peaceful exactly, but patient. The monks believe this patience is its own form of prayer. You're starting to see why. It's not about speaking to God. It's about waiting long enough to notice when He whispers back. You return to your cell, where the single candle you left burning has collapsed into a puddle of wax. You sit on the cot, pulling the blanket tight, and let the stillness fold around you. Your breath fogs in front of you again, a soft pulse in the frozen air. Somewhere beyond the wall, snow slides off the roof with a muffled sigh. That's the closest thing to conversation you'll hear until morning. You smile faintly. There's a comfort in this sense that life continues even when nothing moves. Before sleep takes you, you think of the monks who built all this silence with their own hands, cutting stone, hauling timber, stacking walls that would one day hold their descendants' prayers. They probably never imagined someone like you sitting here, centuries later, listening to the same cold air and thinking the same thoughts. But maybe that's the trick. Maybe silence isn't emptiness at all. It's continuity. An unbroken chant stretched across time, too slow for the ear, but perfect for the soul. You exhale once more, watching the cloud dissolve and drift into sleep with the faint hum of snow falling somewhere just beyond reach. You wake to scratching. It's faint at first, a soft rhythmic skitter that seems to echo from the walls themselves. For a moment, you think it's your imagination, the leftover sound of dreams dissolving into dawn. Then it comes again, sharper this time, followed by the unmistakable squeak of something small, hungry, and unrepentantly alive. You light your lamp and scan the corner of your cell. There, half hidden behind a chest of hymnals, two beady eyes flash like stolen ink drops. A rat. Of course. You sigh, whispering, Pax vobiscum, as if peace could negotiate species boundaries. The rat pauses, unimpressed, then resumes whatever theological mischief it was engaged in. Welcome to another blessed morning in paradise. You pull your robe tighter and step into the corridor. The monastery is awake, or at least trying to be. Lanterns swing on their hooks, casting shaky circles of light across the frost-bitten stone. You follow the faint scent of wax and smoke toward the reliquary, that small, locked chamber where the bones of saints reside. Every monastery has one, a cabinet of holy history disguised as a locked box of calcium. The air grows heavier as you approach, not from temperature but from centuries of reverence compressed into a single room. Inside, the relics wait in their glass and gold cages, femurs wrapped in linen, skull fragments mounted on velvet, bits of hair sealed in crystal. It's macabre and majestic all at once. You kneel, though mostly to get warm near the candle. A monk beside you murmurs a prayer so soft it could be mistaken for breathing. The relics gleam faintly, and you realize that in a world before antibiotics, bones were the closest thing to medicine. They were comfort you could see, evidence that holiness had once been embodied and might be again. A chronicler once described a pilgrimage where peasants touched a saint's rib and swore it cured their frostbite. Historians call it superstition. You call it optimism with better branding. You lean closer to the display of St. Ulrich's hand, mummified, yellowed, forever frozen mid-blessing, and notice fresh teeth marks at the edge of its reliquary. Rats. Even the sacred isn't spared their democracy. There's something poetic about that vermin and veneration sharing the same space, both surviving the centuries through persistence. Brother Hugo once joked that monasteries have two eternal orders, Benedictines and rodents, and both keep strict schedules. You can't help laughing softly. the sound shocking in this solemn air. The monk beside you smiles too, proving that even holiness has a sense of humor. Then, as if summoned by irony itself, the scratching returns, this time from above. You look up to see a small blur dart along the beam, its tail tracing a sinuous line across the ceiling. The monk sighs, rises, and leaves to fetch the cat, whose name, appropriately, is Dominus. You stay, watching the candlelight ripple over relics that have witnessed everything: plague, reform, frost, famine, now rodents. And yet they remain, serene, indifferent to their new neighbors. That's resilience on a cosmic scale. A thought creeps in. Maybe the monks keep these bones not to remember miracles but to practice endurance. Faith, like bone, is stronger when it's been broken and mended. You trace a finger along the glass of the reliquary and imagine the saint whose hand this once was, someone who lived, shivered, prayed, and maybe, like you, occasionally questioned why holiness had to be so drafty. The warmth from the candle seeps into your fingertips. You feel absurdly comforted by the idea that decay and devotion can coexist without canceling each other out. The door creaks open, and Dominus enters, tail high, eyes bright with divine purpose. The rat, unrepentant, vanishes into the shadows. The cat yawns, curls up near the altar, and falls instantly asleep. Typical. You snuff the candle, pocket what's left of its heat, and head back toward the cloister. The floor hums faintly under your steps, that same deep vibration of centuries still holding. Outside, the snow continues its slow assault on the world. But inside, everything holds steady. The relics, the rats, the prayers, the patience. It's not perfection, it's persistence. And maybe that's the holiest miracle of all. Sleep doesn't come easily in a monastery, but when it does, it comes like a visitor with conditions: a knock, a whisper, and then a door left ajar. Tonight, exhaustion finally catches you between prayers, and you slip into that fragile borderland where thought turns to dream. The straw mattress rustles beneath you, your blanket scratches at your chin, and the last candle sighs out with a faint curl of smoke. The silence presses against your ears until it becomes a kind of music, low, endless, humming with all the words you haven't said. Then, without warning, the cold cell begins to dissolve. You're walking through a market. It's loud, impossibly loud. Bells clang, vendors shout, children laugh, dogs bark, the sheer chaos of life uncontained. You smell roasted chestnuts, spilled ale, the iron tang of horseshoes. It's too vivid to be fantasy. It's your body remembering warmth. You pass a cart of apples, each one glistening red as temptation itself, and you bite into one without guilt, juice running down your chin. Somewhere, a lute player fumbles through a tune that's half hymn, half tavern song. You laugh, a sound that surprises you. For the first time in weeks, your jaw doesn't ache from restraint. In the dream, your robe feels lighter. You wander through the crowd, anonymous, unburdened. A woman selling herbs hands you a sprig of rosemary for memory, and you tuck it into your sleeve. A boy offers you bread in exchange for a story. You tell him about the night the candle spoke, and he believes every word. The dream feels impossibly kind. No bells, no rules, just rhythm, sunlight, motion. You turn a corner and find yourself at a river. The water moves quick and silver, whispering secrets the way monks whisper psalms. You dip your hand in. It's warm. The sensation jolts you so strongly that it wakes you. You sit upright in your cell, gasping. The candle's out. The air is ice again. The rosemary is gone. But the warmth lingers in your palm, and for a second you can almost hear the river under the wind's low moan. Dreams, you realize, are the monastery's last act of rebellion. They break the rule without breaking faith. Even the strictest abbot can't excommunicate imagination. You lie back down, smiling into the dark. There's a historical record about this. One monk from the 14th century who confessed to dreaming of dancing in the village square. His superior wrote it down as a spiritual lapse brought on by the devil's melody. Another scribe, marginally kinder, added in the margin, or by homesickness. Scholars still debate whether the note was satire or sympathy. Either way, it rings true. You've been here long enough to understand. Holiness doesn't erase the world. It only muffles it. The longing never disappears. It just learns to kneel quietly. You roll onto your side and stare at the window, where frost feathers across the glass in branching veins of silver. Each pattern looks deliberate, almost like writing. Maybe it is. Maybe nature keeps its own scriptorium, carving prayers in ice. You wonder how many monks have lain awake like this before you, thinking not of heaven but of hearths and faces and markets they'll never see again. A small guilt stirs, but it's quickly smothered by comfort. The quiet realization that wanting warmth doesn't cancel faith, it completes it. The wind howls suddenly, a long, low sound that rattles the shutters and echoes down the corridor. You close your eyes again, and, just for mischief, picture that same dream market one more time. The apples, the laughter, the boy with the bread. You whisper a psalm under your breath, half blessing, half lullaby. The last thought before you drift off again is almost funny. Even monks have midnight cravings not for food, but for color, for noise, for proof that the world beyond the walls still spins. And as sleep folds over you like a second cloak, you realize it does, and that's enough. No one here wears a watch, and yet everyone knows the time. The rhythm of bells, the spacing of chants, the shuffle of feet across stone, each serves as a clock made of sound instead of gears. You wake to the same gray half-light you've woken to for weeks, unsure whether it's still night or already the next night disguised as morning. The idea of hours has dissolved. What's left is sequence: pray, eat, copy, pray again. The monks call it or do, the sacred order. But to you it feels like floating inside a slow heartbeat that never quite stops. You stretch your hands toward the tiny window. Frost flowers lace the glass in patterns so delicate they seem to be thinking. Somewhere far away, another bell rings, dull and heavy as a glacier shifting. The sound doesn't mark minutes, it measures endurance. You rise, splash your face with water that could double as penance, and make your way through the cloister. The corridor glows faintly blue from moonlight trapped in ice. Every echo of your sandals returns a fraction later, as if time itself is lagging. You pass Brother Hugo carrying a bundle of wood for the kitchen stove, counting under his breath to keep rhythm. His breath puffs out like tiny ghosts. You realize that without clocks, counting has replaced measurement. Each step, each prayer, each inhale a bead on an invisible rosary. A chronicler once claimed monks invented the mechanical clock not to know when to pray, but to prove they already did. The logic is charmingly circular, like everything else here. Another historian insists the first clocks were acts of rebellion, machines that dared to quantify eternity. The argument remains unresolved, because time inside a monastery doesn't behave like time outside it. It doesn't flow, it folds. Every repetition loops back on itself until the present feels identical to yesterday, purified by sameness. You reach the chapel again, where a single candle burns before the altar, steady, confident, indifferent to the cold. Its flame flickers once as though acknowledging you. You sit, letting the silence settle, and start to sense what the monks mean by discipline. It isn't punishment or even obedience, it's precision. Doing the same act so many times that meaning distills out of motion. You think of your life before this: screens, alarms, deadlines, and how every moment there was chopped into slices so thin you could barely taste them. Here, time is thick, slow, chewable. It has texture. Your stomach growls. You ignore it. Hunger has become another hour marker. Somewhere, a draft slips through the chapel door and brushes your face, smelling faintly of smoke and cold iron. You whisper a psalm, mostly for company. The words feel ancient yet strangely new, like tools rediscovered after being buried in snow. You close your eyes and listen to the wind move through the beams. It's rhythmic, almost mechanical. A natural clock still keeping its own perfect measure while the human ones rust in towers. You think of a joke Brother Anselm told once. Whispered during a midnight vigil, "We keep time so precisely that even eternity runs late here." You'd laughed then, quietly, but now you understand. The discipline isn't about domination of time. It's about surrender, letting go of the need to know what hour it is and finding comfort in the certainty that the bell will tell you when to breathe again. You smile, half frozen, half enlightened. Somewhere deep inside the monastery, metal meets metal. A soft, inevitable chime, and once more the endless night begins again. exactly on schedule without a single clock in sight. By the fourth vigil, your eyes have learned the trick of staring without seeing. The flame on the altar blurs, stretching into ribbons of light, and soon the smoke rising from it becomes a living thing, curling, coiling, whispering shapes that dissolve before you can name them. You blink, and the motion changes. The tendril becomes a wing, a hand, a face half remembered from a fresco. You tell yourself it's just the cold, or lack of sleep, or the fact that your diet has consisted of soup and penance for 3 weeks. Still, you keep looking. Everyone does. Every monk here has his own relationship with the smoke. Some claim to see saints, others temptations. You, as usual, see both. The candle sputters, its flame bending as if something unseen just exhaled across it. The smell of tallow thickens the air, sweet and faintly nauseating. You inhale anyway. There's a line in the rule about vigilance. Keep watch in the night, lest the Lord come and find you sleeping. But what the rule doesn't mention is that keeping watch this long can turn imagination into theology. The smoke forms a shape again, this time clearer, sharper, a silhouette that seems to bow before the crucifix. You lean forward, half curious, half horrified, and the motion breaks it apart. The air swirls, then stills. Your pulse slows, your breath steadies. Maybe that's all the vision was for, to remind you you're still capable of surprise. You remember a story Brother Hugo told. A monk in the Pyrenees who claimed the smoke from his candle spelled Latin words each night. He copied them down, built a theology around them, and died convinced God had dictated a new gospel through combustion. Centuries later, scholars examined the manuscript and concluded that most of the letters were simply soot patterns and wishful thinking. Even so, the pages glow faintly now under candlelight, as if memory itself kept burning. Historians still debate whether the man was mad or mystic. You decide it hardly matters. Faith and hallucination are cousins who often borrow each other's coats. The smoke thickens again, filling the small chapel with the smell of melted fat and faint ash. You think you see something moving in it. A procession of tiny figures walking upward, fading as they go. Angels, maybe, or the ghosts of every breath ever spent in prayer here. The idea comforts you more than it should. You realize that in this frozen place where even time hesitates, vision is the only warmth left. You close your eyes and listen. The air hums. Someone nearby shifts in his pew. The sound small but startling, like reality clearing its throat. You open your eyes again. The smoke has thinned. The shapes have gone. What's left is only light, fragile but determined, clinging to its wick like a secret. It refuses to drop. You exhale through your nose, slow and steady, and the flame wavers, answering you. It's ridiculous, talking to fire, but so is everything about surviving winter through prayer. You find yourself whispering thank you, not sure to whom. The word drifts into the haze, lost among centuries of identical murmurs. The bell will ring soon, and you'll move on to the next ritual, the next hour. But for now, you stay still, watching the smoke curl upward, wondering if it carries messages too faint for even faith to hear. By morning, the world outside has disappeared. The windows glow faintly, not from light but from the sheer thickness of the snow pressed against them, a white silence so deep it swallows every sound before it's born. You wake to the muffled hush of an abbey, sealed off from the world, its stone ribs groaning quietly under the weight. When you push open the wooden door to the courtyard, a wall of snow greets you like a polite but insistent angel. It takes 3 monks and a shovel fashioned from an old breadboard to carve a narrow tunnel to the firewood shed. The snow is dry and powdery, cascading in pale curls, clinging to your robe like judgment. The air tastes sharper than prayer. Every breath burns, every exhale crystallizes before your eyes. You fall into rhythm with the others. Shovel, chant, your voices rising in shaky unison. The psalms serve double duty here. Devotion and timing. Each verse becomes a measure of distance, each refrain a promise of warmth waiting back inside. You remember that the rule of Saint Benedict instructs, idleness is the enemy of the soul, and realize idleness is also the enemy of circulation. Your body moves without permission, guided by faith or survival. By now they feel like the same thing. Brother Hugo laughs once, a brief puff of warmth lost to the wind. You've rarely heard it. Laughter sounds exotic in this place, but it spreads, a small contagion. Someone answers with a verse from Psalm 126. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. It fits, though no one feels particularly agricultural right now. Still, the rhythm of voices and the scrape of wood on ice start to blend into something musical. It's absurdly beautiful, this moment. Frozen monks harmonizing with the storm, turning exhaustion into liturgy. You find yourself smiling, the ice forming tiny halos in your beard, and decide that holiness might just be the ability to laugh through frostbite. A gust of wind breaks the rhythm, whipping your hood back, the cold claws at your ears. Snow swirls so thick that the world vanishes again. Only the chanting remains, disembodied, as if heaven itself has joined in. You recall a curious entry from a 12th century chronicle. Monks in Norway who believed blizzards were angels washing the earth with divine soap. The fringe detail notes that they even named the fiercest storms after virtues: patience, chastity, obedience, because enduring them was thought to cleanse sin. You wonder which virtue this storm is, since it seems especially thorough. Finally, the doorway to the woodpile appears like a revelation. Inside, the stacked logs are rimed with frost, but dry enough to burn. You and Hugo haul them back one by one, your footprints already filling with drifting snow. The weight feels good. It gives purpose to cold bones. When you reach the hearth in the refectory, you kneel and coax a spark from flint. The fire catches slowly, reluctantly, then flares into gold. The room fills with the scent of resin and smoke, and everyone gathers close, hands extended, faces glowing like relics. For the first time in days, silence isn't empty. It's soft, generous, alive with crackling flame. Someone hums a psalm under his breath and others join, their voices low and rough as the wind dying outside. You lean closer to the fire, watching the snow melt from your sleeves, tiny rivers steaming away into nothing. The heat bites almost painfully sweet, and you think this is what faith must feel like when it finally works. Not thunder, not miracles, just the steady return of warmth. Outside, the snow keeps falling, covering your path again, erasing the evidence that you ever moved through it. But the sound of chanting drifts upward through the chimney, mingling with the storm, and for a moment you imagine it traveling miles across white fields, voices against the endless winter, small and human and undefeated. The storm finally passes, but the silence it leaves behind is heavier than the snow. The sky has turned a pale metallic gray, the kind of color that looks like it's thinking about more weather. You return to the chapel after Compline, the final prayers of the day, when all is supposed to be still. The air inside is warmer now from the earlier fire, yet you can still see your breath hovering like faint incense in the candlelight. You sit on the wooden bench near the window and listen to the wind rearranging itself outside. For the first time in hours, you hear something new, a low, questioning who that cuts through the quiet like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. The owl calls again. It's close, maybe perched on the chapel roof or one of the bare trees beyond the cloister wall. The sound isn't frightening exactly, but it feels deliberate, as if the bird is addressing someone in particular. You glance up at the rafters, half expecting to see its silhouette gliding between the arches. Nothing. The monks around you continue their prayers, unbothered. For them, the owl's cry is background noise, another note in the symphony of creation. But for you, it's impossible not to listen. Something in its tone carries the weight of repetition, the same question asked for centuries and never quite answered. There's an entry in a 13th century bestiary that called owls birds of penance, because they live in darkness and feed when others sleep. Some monks, however, took the opposite view, the owl as the devil's bird, mocking those who pray in the night. The debate never really ended. Scholars today argue that the symbolism shifted over time, from curse to contemplative, as humanity grew more forgiving of things with large eyes and poor timing. You can't decide which version fits better. The owl outside sounds neither angelic nor sinister, just tired, like everyone else. The abbot finishes the psalm, and the chapel falls into its midnight stillness. You think it's over, but then the owl cries once more. Closer this time, so loud the candles tremble. Every monk freezes. Even the abbot looks up. There's a long pause where the whole room holds its breath. And then quietly, Brother Hugo whispers. He sings for those who cannot sleep. No one answers, but the tension softens, replaced by a hush that feels almost affectionate. The next chant begins, lower and slower, as if the owl has joined the choir. Outside, the snow catches the moonlight, glowing faintly blue. Through the window you glimpse a shadow moving along the wall. A brief spread of wings, a glide, then gone. You imagine the owl circling the chapel, tracing invisible loops over the frozen earth, the silent guardian of the sleepless. Perhaps it watches over the entire monastery, its pale face peering down through centuries, keeping count of every whispered prayer that escapes through the cracks. A strange comfort settles over you. The bird's cry no longer feels lonely. It feels like proof that the world beyond these walls still exists, still watches, still breathes. You realize that this is what faith sounds like on its best nights. Not certainty, but echo. A voice calling through darkness met not with answers but with attention. You close your eyes and listen for it again. The wind sighs. The candles hum. The owl waits a long while before speaking once more. When it does, its voice sounds almost human. Weary, patient, ancient. You smile into the dimness, whispering back one word you know it won't understand but might appreciate anyway. Amen, the scriptorium again. You can hear it before you see it, the chorus of sniffles, wheezes, and muffled coughs echoing between walls that hold more germs than relics. The air is thick with the damp sweetness of ink and wax, but colder than a saint's patience. You step inside, and the sight is both ordinary and heroic. Rows of monks hunched over parchment, their breath rising in pale clouds, their sleeves blackened with soot and smudged gold. Faith here has a soundtrack, and it's half prayer, half respiratory distress. You pull your robe closer and join the line of the weary, your fingers trembling not with devotion but circulation failure. You sit beside Brother Hugo, who has wrapped rags around his hands like makeshift mittens. He nods in greeting and goes back to his quill, muttering the first line of Psalm 102. I am like a pelican of the wilderness. I am like an owl of the desert. You grin. You're more like a penguin of the cloister, you whisper, and though that joke won't be invented for 800 years, the sentiment lands. He hides a smile under his hood, proof that even sanctity has room for sarcasm. The abbot, seated at the far end, pretends not to notice. The scratching begins. Quills drag across parchment like mice scurrying through snow. Someone sneezes a massive, catastrophic sneeze that nearly snuffs 3 candles. The abbot sighs. Someone else whispers, Deo gratias, as if gratitude might disinfect the air. The scriptorium is a place of fragile miracles. Manuscripts survive sneezes, ink refuses to freeze, pages dry by sheer stubbornness. You think of all the Bibles, psalters and sermons written by men who spent half their lives coughing into their sleeves. A historical note drifts through your mind. The monks of Monte Cassino once blamed holy dust for their constant illness, believing it to be the residue of divine inspiration rather than mold. Modern scholars, unsurprisingly, call it mildew. The debate persists among the faithful, though the mildew is definitely winning. You try to focus on your own work. A copy of the rule. Ironically enough, the very text commanding silence while your throat begs to rebel. You dip the quill, steady your breath, and begin. The ink glides, thick and dark, forming letters so careful they look afraid of being misinterpreted. Outside, wind rattles the shutters. Inside, Brother Hugo coughs again. You start counting the intervals between coughs. Every 7th one lands perfectly in rhythm with the bell's distant toll. The synchronization is eerie, almost comforting. Maybe even the illnesses here obey the liturgy. Then a new sound. Tiny, delicate, rhythmic. Drip, drip. You glance upward. The ceiling has begun to leak. One cold drop of meltwater for every amen. You move your page aside just in time to save it. Though another monk isn't so lucky, his Latin dissolves into a small, artistic blur. He stares at it a moment, then mutters something that might be a prayer or a curse. You can't tell. Either would fit. And yet, amid all this damp chaos, beauty persists. You glance at the pages drying by the hearth. Glowing capitals, curling vines painted in lapis blue and crimson. The words may be the same as yesterday's, but each page feels like rebirth. That's the strange, humbling truth of monastic labor. You spend your life copying meaning you didn't invent, preserving words you'll never own, creating art that demands you vanish behind it. And still, somehow, it matters. When the bell rings for rest, you flex your fingers, stiff as carved wood. Brother Hugo catches your eye, raises his inky rag of a hand, and whispers, "At least the coughing keeps the silence holy." You laugh softly, careful not to wake the abbot's frown, and blow out your candle. The smoke rises, curling toward the leaking roof, where each drop of water briefly hisses into steam. The air smells of ink and illness, of work and worship, proof that even imperfection can be sacred if it's done often enough. You step into the corridor, the coughing fading behind you, and feel oddly proud. Somewhere, centuries from now, a reader will trace your shaky letters with a finger and call it faith. By the time the evening bell calls you back to the chapel, your knees already know what's coming. The floor is cold, the same unyielding slab of stone that has trained humility into generations. The monks file in, each one a slow-moving silhouette, each one carrying his own particular ache like a small relic tucked beneath the robe. The air smells faintly of wax and damp wool. It's prayer hour again, though honestly it's hard to tell where one prayer ends and the next begins. You kneel, as always, the stone biting through the fabric. For a moment, every joint in your body protests in Latin. The chant begins softly. The abbot's voice rises and falls, a tide of syllables washing over the shivering congregation. You join in, your voice wobbling on the lower notes, but no one cares. The rule says the effort itself is sacred. The cold seeps up your shins, and you start shifting your weight from knee to knee like a pilgrim negotiating with eternity. You recall reading that medieval monks considered posture itself a form of theology. Every joint bends toward heaven, one old abbot supposedly wrote. Judging by the current pain, you think heaven must be very far away. Your mind wanders to the absurd details that never make it into the illuminated manuscripts, the bruises, the calluses, the quiet pops and creaks that accompany devotion. You remember a chronicler's note that one 14th century monastery in Burgundy actually kept a knee ointment recipe made from beeswax and holy water. The mixture was supposed to soothe soreness while maintaining purity, though later scholars discovered it also contained powdered nettle proof that divine logic occasionally limps. Another monk, more practical, simply stuffed sheep's wool under his habit during winter prayers. The abbot banned the practice for being comfort bordering on sin. The chanting swells. Your thoughts melt back into the rhythm. Pain becomes pattern. Pattern becomes stillness. It's strange, this transformation, how the same body that rebels against endurance eventually learns to find peace inside it. You start counting your breaths in sync with the psalm. Inhale, exhale, mercy, patience. Somewhere nearby, a monk collapses into a discreet sitting position mid-prayer. No one moves to correct him. The sound of kneeling fills the room like rainfall, soft, continuous, anonymous. You look toward the crucifix. The flickering candles make Christ's shadow stretch and shrink across the wall, as if he's bowing in sympathy. For a fleeting second, you feel something like understanding, that devotion isn't about denying pain, but offering it, shaping it, turning it into rhythm. The bell tolls again, signaling the end of the vigil. You rise slowly, legs trembling, joints crackling like kindling. Every movement hurts, but it's a familiar hurt, the kind that confirms you were present, that you did the thing, that your voice added its small thread to the woven chant. As the monks file out, Brother Hugo mutters under his breath, "If sanctity doesn't cure these knees, nothing will." You grin, limping beside him down the corridor. The air outside is cold but kind, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the refectory hearth. The stars above look carved rather than shining, crisp and sharp against the black. You pause beneath them, rubbing your knees, half in prayer, half in complaint, and think how even pain can be routine here, ritualized, sanctified, and oddly reassuring. Faith, after all, is just persistence in disguise, and tonight your knees have become saints in their own right. At last a rumor spreads. A feast day approaches. It's not the kind of feast that would impress a nobleman, but in a monastery halfway buried in snow, even a little extra bread feels like a miracle. The bell for lauds rings brighter this morning, as if it too knows what's coming. The monks move with the same solemn rhythm as always, But something subtle has shifted. Eyes glint beneath hoods, steps quicken, someone hums a psalm in a suspiciously cheerful key. You can smell it already from the kitchen. Roasted onions, a hint of herbs, maybe even butter. In winter, those scents count as prophecy. The abbot declares the feast in honor of Saint Bridget, patron of poets, dairy maids, and, conveniently, warmth. The announcement earns no applause, of course. Monastic enthusiasm is best expressed through slightly more upright posture. Still, you feel it. A flicker of joy running like an undercurrent beneath the rule of silence. Preparations begin quietly like a conspiracy. The cook and two helpers stir great iron pots over a fire that hisses with life, while others carry baskets of turnips, cabbage, and, wonder of wonders, a few precious roots of garlic. In the corner, a monk carefully pours honey into a bowl, his hands trembling as if the jar contained sunlight itself. You join the labor, chopping, stirring, whispering short prayers of gratitude every time the knife doesn't slip. Someone sneaks a joke about Saint Bridget turning water into ale. Another adds that the miracle probably started as creative bookkeeping. A third claims she once brewed enough beer for an entire kingdom. You all smile like men getting away with something mildly heretical. The air grows warmer, heavy with steam and laughter too soft to break any rules. By evening, the refectory glows like a small golden world. Candles line the tables, and every bowl gleams with something that could almost be called stew. There's bread, thick, dark, smelling faintly of smoke, and a small wedge of cheese per man. You take yours reverently, as though it might vanish under too much attention. The reader at the pulpit begins the scripture in a voice steadier than usual, but even he can't resist letting the corners of his mouth curve. Each word seems rounder, richer, seasoned by the scent of food. When the time comes to eat, you bow your head, mutter the blessing, and taste the first spoonful. It's astonishing what a handful of salt and fat can do to the human soul. Warmth blooms in your chest. Around you, the clinking of spoons and bowls sounds like a kind of music, rustic, fragile, holy. No one talks, but the silence is friendly, full of gratitude too deep for speech. You think of the verse, "Man shall not live by bread alone," and chuckle inwardly because tonight bread feels like enough. Later, after the meal, a single flask of wine appears, passed discreetly from hand to hand. When it reaches you, you take the smallest sip imaginable, sour, earthy, glorious. Brother Hugo raises the flask toward the crucifix and whispers, "To the survival of January." You almost choke laughing, and quickly turn it into a cough. Even the abbot pretends not to notice. The moment feels human in the best possible way. As the candles burn low, the monks begin to hum an old Gaelic hymn said to have been sung at Bridget's hearth centuries ago. The melody is simple and slow, rising like smoke from a warm chimney. You join in, the words barely audible but the meaning clear. Gratitude, endurance, the taste of sweetness in a bitter season. For one night, the monastery feels less like exile and more like home. When the hymn fades, you look around the refectory and see faces softened by candlelight, wrinkled, tired, content. Tomorrow will return to fasting and frost, to discipline and silence, but for now the world has thawed. You think of Saint Bridget, who allegedly kept a perpetual flame burning at her abbey, tended by women who never let it go out. You watch the last candle sputter on the table, and understand the point isn't to keep the fire endless, only to keep relighting it. That's all any of you are doing. One winter night at a time, passing the light along. The next morning, the world is gray again, and the warmth of St. Bridget's feast has faded into legend. The logs that fed last night's fire are gone. The woodpile outside has shrunk to a scandalous stub. The abbot frowns the way only a man can frown when holiness and inventory collide. "We shall burn what remains," he says, "and trust Providence for tomorrow." The monks nod, though you can sense the quiet arithmetic already at work in every mind. How many logs to make it to Sunday? How many prayers per ember? You volunteer for wood duty because at least chopping feels like progress, and progress feels like heat. Outside, the air has stiffened into a solid thing. Snow squeaks beneath your boots. The axe glints like a frozen psalm. Brother Hugo joins you, humming through his scarf. Each swing of the blade releases a puff of pine scent, Sharp, clean, shockingly alive. You stack the pieces neatly, trying to forget that the pile you're cutting down is all that stands between comfort and devotion by frostbite. The wind moans through the cloister arch, an old monk complaining about the weather. Somewhere in the distance a bell tolls, thin as a thread of metal, calling others to prayer while you work. There's a story the abbot likes to tell on mornings like this, how in the winter of 1191, when famine and snow struck at once, the firewood in the monastery at Chartres mysteriously multiplied. One log burned all night without shrinking, others split themselves when the brothers' strength failed. The record still exists, though modern historians predictably blame miscounting or moisture. Still, the monks who lived it swore otherwise. They called it the miracle of the ember. You and Hugo repeat the tale as you work, half hoping history might recycle its generosity. By midday, the wind sharpens, the snow comes again, soft but relentless, swirling around your feet in ghostly rings. The pile you built seems to melt before your eyes. No matter how many logs you stack, the number looks the same. Maybe we're already in the miracle, Hugo says, wiping his brow. You laugh, then Providence has a poor sense of accounting. He shrugs. Perhaps it multiplies backwards. Less wood, more faith. You can't argue with that logic. It's too cold for theology anyway. When the bell calls you back inside, you leave the wood stacked neatly by the door. The abbot inspects it, counts silently, and nods. Hours later, when you pass again, the pile looks different. Larger, maybe. You tell yourself it's a trick of light, the flicker from the hearth exaggerating the shadows. Yet that evening the fire burns longer than expected. Well into the night, steady and clear. You wake twice expecting darkness, but the flame still dances in the grate, a small, patient sun defying reason. You whisper the obvious question, how? The answer, if it comes, arrives only as warmth against your face. Scholars will always debate such moments. One will call it efficient stacking, another the physics of slow combustion. But in the monastery, the explanation is simpler. The abbot, standing by the fire, says quietly, faith is a fuel that refills itself when used correctly. You stare at the embers glowing like rubies in the ash and find yourself believing him. The room smells of pine and smoke and faint sweetness, the perfume of survival. You close your eyes and think, if miracles are real, they must sound exactly like this, wood crackling, snow whispering at the door, and the steady heartbeat of flame insisting one log at a time that warmth still belongs to the faithful. No rule in the monastery inspires more whispered rebellion than the one about rest, or rather, the lack of it. Sleep is rationed here the way spices are, sparingly, suspiciously, as if too much might corrupt the soul. The monks divide the night into segments, a sacred fragmentation known as the divine office: wake, pray, doze, wake again. To the untrained mortal, it feels like a medieval form of jet lag with theological footnotes. You've adapted, mostly. Mostly. Tonight, after muttons, the abbot dismisses the brothers to their cells. Candles gutter out one by one until the corridors glow only with moonlight trapped in ice. You return to your cot, the straw sighing under you, the wool blanket a whisper of warmth. You lie still, waiting for sleep to find you before the next bell does. It never comes quickly. Monastic sleep, you've learned, is less a descent than a negotiation. You drift halfway down, hover in a twilight where psalms and dreams blur together, and hover there until the next call to prayer rips you back up like a hooked fish. It's during one of those in-between states that the thought arrives. Maybe they were onto something. The pattern, 2 sleeps with a vigil in between, wasn't punishment, it was design. You remember reading about how ordinary medieval people did the same thing. First sleep, then waking to tend fires, pray, or gossip in whispers before second sleep. Some scholars call it polyphasic rest, others practical survival in cold houses. The abbot, however, calls it a training of the soul in the rhythm of resurrection. Sleep, wake, rise again. You can't tell whether it's poetry or propaganda. Both work. Brother Hugo once confessed that he secretly loves the midnight waking. It's the only time, he said, when even God seems drowsy enough to listen without judgment. You agreed then, and you agree now. There's something strangely intimate about being awake while the world sleeps, like catching the universe off guard. The silence feels elastic, stretching around your thoughts. You breathe in and hear your own heart as clearly as the next bell that will interrupt it. And then, predictably, someone breaks the silence. Brother Anselm, muttering from the next cell. "If sleep is holy," he says to no one, "why does it hurt so much to lose it?" You chuckle into your blanket. Maybe that's the purification part. He grumbles something unprintable in Latin, and you both laugh quietly. Conspirators against insomnia. Humor, it turns out, is the only sedative allowed. The bell eventually rings again, thin and merciless. You rise automatically, the body remembering what the mind resists. The hallway is a slow parade of half-awake saints, robes dragging, faces slack with reverent exhaustion. You join them, each step measured, each breath clouding in the cold. No one speaks, but the sound of sandals on stone sinks into rhythm, an accidental lullaby made of discipline. The chapel glows ahead, candles trembling like tired eyes. You kneel, begin the psalm, and realize that the words "in nocte vigilavi et meditatum est in nomine tuo" mean exactly what you're doing. In the night I kept watch and meditated on thy name. You almost laugh at the cosmic neatness of it. Faith has built an entire schedule around sleeplessness and somehow made it sound noble. By the time the service ends, the horizon has begun to pale. You step outside, the air crisp enough to sting, and watch the first faint stripe of sunrise smudge the snow. For a moment, you feel the strange exhilaration of having survived another night on duty. You realize that this pattern, sleep, wake, endure, isn't just routine, it's philosophy. The monks have turned insomnia into liturgy. Maybe that's why their prayers feel so strong. They're written by people who've seen too many dawns to doubt them. You close your eyes briefly, the sunlight warm against your face. The next bell will ring soon, calling you to work again, but for now you stand still, half awake, half dreaming, exactly balanced between the sacred and the human, just as the rule intended. You can feel it before anyone says it, the edge of winter softening, the wind losing its teeth. The monastery's stones no longer bite when you touch them, and the air carries a strange new scent, damp earth instead of snow. It's not spring yet, but something in the light has changed. Even the shadows seem warmer. The abbot says nothing, of course, yet everyone moves a little faster, as if the body remembers seasons the soul has forgotten. You rise for matins with the same groggy reverence as always, but when you open the chapel door, the dawn spilling through the stained glass feels like an accident of mercy. The monks file in, voices low, their breath no longer steaming in clouds. For the first time in months, the candles aren't fighting the dark. They're complementing it. You kneel, press your palms to the stone, and realize it's merely cool now, not punishing. The psalms tonight sound different too, less desperate, more like gratitude disguised as duty. You chant them by muscle memory, but the tone in your voice betrays relief. After months of being tested by ice, you've learned that survival itself can feel like prayer. After lauds, the abbot allows the doors to the cloister to stay open. The courtyard dazzles with the smallest patches of grass peeking through snow. Brother Hugo grins openly for once and murmurs, "The saints have turned down the refrigerator." You laugh, a little too loudly, and quickly cross yourself as insurance. Together you step outside, blinking against the pale light. The fountain, frozen since December, gurgles again, hesitant but determined. Water, the true miracle of any winter's end, slides over the stone basin, catching sunlight in tiny prisms. You remember a note from a 15th century chronicle that said monks greeted the first thaw with a silent procession, carrying candles from the chapel to the garden, where they let the wax melt into the earth as a blessing for new crops. No one in your monastery remembers that practice, but the idea lingers. When no one's watching, you break a sliver of leftover wax from a candle stub and press it into the ground near the fountain. For whatever grows next, you whisper. The gesture feels foolish and sacred at once. The warmth creeps slowly through the day. Drips fall from the eaves in rhythmic ticks, a liquid clock announcing the change of season. In the scriptorium, the ink stays fluid without help from the fire, and the pages dry faster. The abbot even allows the shutters to remain open. Sunlight spills across the desks, startlingly golden after so many gray weeks. Dust motes drift like small saints on pilgrimage. For a moment, no one coughs, no one sneezes. The quiet is filled not with absence but with renewal. Night returns, but it's gentler now. The stars look closer, their light less brittle. You walk the cloister before Compline, your steps echoing softly between columns. The snow outside has hardened into glittering crust, reflecting moonlight like scattered coins. You realize how strange it feels to walk without hunching, to breathe without wincing. The monks pass you, nodding, each lost in private astonishment. No one speaks, because there's nothing to explain. The cold didn't vanish, it simply decided to forgive you for a while. You pause by the door of the chapel and look back once more at the courtyard, the faint green specks beneath the snow, the air moving freely again through the arches. You think of every frozen morning survived, every numb prayer whispered through cracked lips, and it hits you with quiet certainty. Endurance, repeated long enough, becomes its own kind of grace. Tomorrow the same bells will ring, the same routine will unfold, but something fundamental has shifted. The monastery breathes differently now, lighter, hopeful, alive. You whisper one last prayer into the thawing air, not for warmth but for memory, that when the next winter comes you'll remember this exact sound, the drip of melting snow, the faint hum of water returning to motion, the silence between seasons when the world holds its breath and waits to begin again. Dot. The final bell rings softly, so softly that you almost mistake it for wind. It's the last night of the long winter, though no one dares say so aloud. You wake before the others, not out of discipline but habit. The body has become a clock that refuses to stop keeping time. The air is cool but no longer cruel. You rise, pull the robe around your shoulders, and open the door to a corridor painted silver by the moon's retreat. The lanterns are still burning, the last few flames wobbling in their cups, exhausted from months of vigil. You walk slowly past them as if not to startle the night while it's preparing to leave. The chapel waits, vast and dim. The candles on the altar flicker toward the end of their wicks. You kneel once more on the stone floor that's now merely cold instead of punishing, and let your hands rest loosely on your knees. The others arrive, their footsteps as soft as breathing. The first chant begins, quiet, wavering, yet perfectly in tune with the pale light gathering in the eastern window. For once, no one hurries. The psalms unfold like sighs, the voices rising and falling with the rhythm of the dawn itself. You feel the old ache in your knees, but it doesn't matter now. The pain has turned into proof that you've stayed the course. The candles sputter. The windows lighten. Outside, the courtyard stones glisten with the melt of yesterday's frost. Birds, real birds, not the imagined ones of dream and psalm, begin to call from the trees beyond the wall. It's been months since you heard that sound, and it makes you smile without meaning to. The choir continues, slower, softer, as if unwilling to interrupt the bird's entrance into the world. You glance down the row of monks and see faces lined, hollow-eyed and peaceful, men who have wrestled the dark for half a year and learned how to make peace with it. You think of all the small lessons winter taught you, that silence can be generous, that hunger sharpens gratitude, that even a faint flame can become holy if you guard it long enough. The memories crowd gently, the candle that seemed to speak, the owl's lonely hymn, the laugh that escaped during St. Bridget's feast, the frozen ink that still wrote scripture anyway. The season collapses into one long, shimmering line, like a thread drawn through beads of cold light. You inhale, and it feels as if the entire monastery exhales with you. The final note of the chant fades, leaving a ringing silence so pure it seems alive. The abbot lifts his head and says the closing blessing, his voice low and steady. When he finishes, no one moves. The sunlight, tentative and golden, touches the floor. One bright stripe across the gray stone, and stops at your knees. You stay like that, breathing, until the warmth begins to spread. The frost, the hunger, the sleeplessness, all of it dissolves into that single warmth. The brothers file out quietly, but you linger, watching dust motes float in the new light like slow-moving prayers. You stand, stretch, and walk toward the door. The courtyard is awake now, water dripping from eaves, a crow scolding the dawn, the faint scent of thawed earth rising from beneath the snow. You lift your face to the sun, still low and pale, and whisper a last benediction for the season that nearly broke you but somehow remade you instead. The monastery hums with quiet life behind you. Ahead, the world opens wide, blue and endless and merciful. You take one last breath of winter air, before it turns to spring, and the thought arrives unbidden. Maybe prayer was never about words at all, but about staying long enough to see the dark finally turn to light. End of script. Sweet dreams.